All right, Laurie, you can kick us off now.
All right. So good morning and welcome to the Pulse Variety Seminar. My name is Laurie Friesen and I'm the Seed Program Manager here at SPG and will be your host for today. For those in attendance, if you provide a CCA number at the time of your registration, SPG will be applying for your CEU credits on your behalf. And be sure to watch for an email from us following this event as it'll include a link to watch the recording. We will be using Slido to accept questions for today's presenters. Simply go to slido.com on your computer, phone, or tablet and enter the event code 3760904 and click Join Event. You can enter the questions in the Q&A tab anytime throughout the presentations, and we will be addressing all the questions in the Q&A session following our presentations. So SPG is guided by a grower-elected board of directors, working to provide leadership and create opportunities for profitable growth for Saskatchewan pulses. One of SPG's 4 focus areas is to increase the profitability of established pulse crops and to expand pulse crop options for Saskatchewan growers. So this event focuses on topics that support this focus area. Before we start with our presenters, we want to show you a short video that provides some additional context for SPG's new pulse breeding landscape. All right, we are going to start with a presentation on upcoming pulse varieties. So I'll just get my presentation here. How is that looking?
Just swap your display settings there, Laurie. We can see the presentation view.
Okay. I think it's on the wrong monitor this time. Okay, try this again here. I don't know why it's not working. Is it working now?
No, just share your screen again and I can direct you.
Okay, I have it open. Maybe I'll move it over to this. Try it this way. Keeps wanting to open on my other monitor. I'm sorry.
No, no worries. Just go back to share screen, and if you share your screen, I can direct you.
Okay.
Now
Okay,
start your presentation.
It's on.
I can see the PowerPoint. Oh, now I can see your notes,
Yeah.
your speaker notes on Word.
When it keeps opening on the other monitor.
There we are. Oh, that looks
Oh, that's
perfect,
working.
Laurie. You're good
It's
to
good
go.
now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. All right. So I'm going to be speaking on new and upcoming pulse varieties. I can't advance the slide now. I don't know why that's not working. Okay, so trends in yellow pea acres. So SBG's goal is to equip growers to select varieties best suited to their farm and marketing goals. The goal is to encourage growers to move away from older, lower yielding varieties by adopting newer, superior varieties. And we are making progress. This graph shows the acres occupied by yellow pea varieties from 2014 to 2024. You can see that CDC Meadow, represented by the darker blue line, is steadily decreasing. And this has been the dominant variety. However, acres of meadow and other older varieties, which is the red line, are steadily declining, and they've dropped nearly 7% in just the last year in favor of newer varieties. Over the last 5 years, recently established varieties represented by this green line have replaced 22% of yellow pea acres previously occupied by meadow and other older varieties. Newer varieties such as AAC Chrome, which is the purple line, as well as more recent varieties shown here in this turquoise line that were released from 2019 to 2021 are emerging and are gaining acres, and this is expected to continue as more seed becomes available. If we look at yield ranking, and this is done with a statistical analysis of long-term regional variety trial data, this revealed that some of the newest varieties ranked in the top 5 in both the north and the south, and you can see that a lot of these top 5 varieties are very new. So we can see some real yield increases. And CDC Meadow, which, like I said, dominates acres, is ranked almost right at the bottom. I just want to highlight a few upcoming varieties that have certified seed for the first time in 2025. These two AFC varieties were registered in 2021, and both of them are early maturing and have a smaller seed size. AAC Beyond has high yield, 106 to 107% of the check in both the north and south geographies, which suggests good yield stability. Seed coat breakage and dimpling are rated fair, so this want to be careful in handling this variety. AAC Julius also has high yield, particularly in the south, where it yields 108% of the check, has good seed characteristics, and is rated moderately resistant to fusarium root rot. Upcoming varieties that have certified seed for 2025 include CDC Citron and CDC Tollefson. Both of these varieties have high yield in both the north and south geographies. Again, good yield stability over multiple environments. Both are rated moderately resistant to fusarium root rot, and both have good seed characteristics. There are a lot of varieties currently in seed multiplication. I won't be highlighting all of these as there's a lot of them, but you can see that there's a lot of new varieties to consider in the upcoming years, and many show good yield improvements, and some have particularly high protein. So I encourage you to check out the performance data in the SASE guide and also talk to distributors to learn more about these. So SBG operates a seed or a pulse quality program. One of the traits that is considered is seed coat breakage, which is an important issue in peas. So SPG recognized the need to develop a standardized, reproducible method for testing for seed coat breakage, and this work is underway at the food center. Lindsay Wang from the food center is testing a method that uses a jewelry polisher, which has steel balls in a rotating drum, which is meant to mimic handling processes at harvest. And preliminary results look promising, as shown in the photo. CDC Amarillo samples before being treated are at the bottom, and after being treated at the top, showing the damage that's been inflicted. And this will prove to be an asset to assess seed coat integrity by variety and by environment, and to help better determine factors influencing breakage issues. Greenness in yellow pea is another trait being assessed in the pulse quality program, and this is done through visual inspection. Differences among varieties and locations have been observed, and we know that CDC Inca has had issues with greenness depending on harvest conditions, as you can see in the photo from the sample. But we're also seeing an issue with CDC Tollefson in 2023 samples. So we need to have more years of data to properly assess this. Protein is a big part of the pulse quality program. This chart only represents 1 year of data, so it only provides a glimpse at varietal comparison. There's not a lot of difference among the top 13 varieties. However, we do see that the top varieties include CDC Hickey, Calf Horn, CDC Boundless, a couple of experimental lines here by CDC and AAC Planet. Now to look at green pea. 6 green pea varieties compete for 91% of green pea acres in Saskatchewan. CDC Forest has had the highest acreage since 2021 and still occupies 32% of the green pea acres. CDC Limerick is still popular, partly due to its good green color and resistance to bleaching, and still occupies 19% of acres. CDC Forest has been the highest yielding green pea, but is prone to bleaching and may be losing favor. So we have a new upcoming variety, CDC Husky. Statistical analysis of long-term regional variety trial data shows that it is the top ranking green pea variety. It was released in 2023. It yields 108% in the south and 106% in the north versus CDC Amarillo. This is a 4 to 6% increase versus CDC Forest, so this is a very strong variety. It has very good standability, better than CDC Forest. It has improved disease resistance as it is rated moderately resistant to Fusarium root rot. And certified seed is anticipated for 2026. Another upcoming variety is CDC Rider. This was released to select seed growers in 2022. And first certified seed is anticipated for 2026. In 6 years of testing, it ranked 3rd overall, just behind CDC Forest, and yields similar to Forest in the south. It has excellent standability, best of the green pea varieties, and good seed characteristics, and improved disease resistance as it is rated moderately resistant to Fusarium root rot. We talked a little bit about bleaching. This is one of the key traits of concern for green peas. And in 2023, over all locations, CDC Forest showed a 7% higher bleaching levels than all other varieties, with CDC Husky, CDC Spruce, and CDC Rider having much better resistance. And you can see that there is better color, particularly in CDC Husky versus CDC Forest. Okay, now to talk about lentils. First, I want to touch on that there was an error in the SASC guide for 2025. And it was regarding the check variety in the header. So the check was changed from CDC Maxim to CDC Nimble in 2024. However, it should say CDC Nimble. All the yield comparisons in the table are calculated as a % of Nimble. And since Nimble yields 8 to 10% higher than Maxim, it looks like all the varieties took a 10% yield decline. So the online version has been corrected. If you look at the digital version, it will be correct. For the printed versions, there were correction sheets have been printed or provided, and those can be requested from SaskAg. So small red lentil, over 70% of small red lentil acres in 2024 were planted to 3 varieties, and that is CDC Maxim, CDC Impulse, and CDC Proclaim. CDC Maxim remains the dominant variety, and that's the dark blue line, occupying 29% of acres, despite its lower yield potential. However, Maxim acres are steadily decreasing in favor of Proclaim and Impulse, which is the red line, and these two combined now occupy 55% of acres. These were both released in 2014 and represent a significant yield advantage over CDC Maxim. Relative newcomers, CDC Semi and CDC Nimble, were released in 2019, and we're seeing a good uptake of these varieties as represented by this purple line. This seed is just starting to become available. And Semi yields 5 to 7% higher than Maxim, and CDC Nimble yields 8 to 10% higher than CDC Maxim. And its good yield is why it became the new Czech variety. If we look at yield ranking of small red lentils, this was done a statistical analysis of only 3 years of head-to-head regional variety trial data, so 2022 to 2024 data. The reason we did a smaller number of years is so that we could get a good comparison to the newer varieties that have only been tested in the last 3 years. And we can see some very positive yield increases from the new small red lentil varieties. Particularly high yielding is the large red lentil, CDC Monarch here, and took the top spot in the south, as well as several new lentil varieties. And this illustrates ongoing improvements in lentil breeding. So you can see that most of these are brand new lines. Just to touch a little bit more on CDC Monarch, it was released in 2023, and certified seed is anticipated for 2026. It is the highest yielding red lentil, yielding 109 to 111% of CDC Nimble, which is a 19% yield advantage versus Maxim. It is classified as a large red lentil with a seed size of 51. If we look at performance data, this is from the SAS seed guide. We can see that there are 4 small red lentils showing up in this year's seed guide, and some have impressive yield gains. Particularly these top 3, which are showing a 16 to 18% yield advantage over Maxim in the north, as well as a yield advantage versus the new Czech Nimble. There's a new variety from CDC called CDC Imani, and it has a red cotyledon with a green seed coat, so you can see in the photo. And this may provide a unique marketing or processing opportunity. And it also has a yield advantage versus CDC Maxim. So new conventional small red lentil is now on offer from SPG. This is the last year SPG will have new varieties for release that were developed under the SPG CDC breeding agreement, and that will be released through the variety release program. So this is a conventional small red lentil that has high yield in both the north and south geographies, indicating good yield stability. It has an 18 to 20% yield advantage versus Maxim in RVT and co-op testing. This first table is regional variety trial testing, where you can see 119 and 118% of Maxim. And this other table is 2 years of testing in the co-op trials, where it yielded 120% of Maxim. So although this variety lacks herbicide tolerance, growers are opting to control weeds with other chemistries due to group 2 herbicide-resistant weeds. So this may be a good option. Note that seed is very limited. There's only 11 bags. So get your orders in early for select seed growers if you're interested in this variety. Registration is pending at this time. We look at large green lentils. There are 3 varieties that compete for about 91% of large green lentil acres. CDC Green Star has been the dominant variety, but CDC Lima, which is this light green line, now occupies equivalent percentage of acres and is steadily increasing. Acres of older varieties such as Greenland and CDC Empower, which is the turquoise line, have been trending downwards since 2018. Although CDC Greenland does still occupy nearly 20% of acres. CDC Grim, which is this yellow line, is a very recent variety and is just emerging at this time. If we look at small green lentils, there are 3 varieties that occupy over 90% of the small green lentil acres. CDC Invincible, which is the red line, was released in 2009 and continues to dominate acres, although it is now steadily dropping in favor of newer, higher yielding varieties. Acres of the conventional variety CDC Kermit, which is a lime green line, has plateaued at 14% of acres. However, the recent Clearfield variety CDC Jiminy, released in 2021, which is the purple line, is seeing rapid uptake. It yields similar to CDC Kermit in the south, but has a 6% yield advantage over Kermit in the north, and has the added advantage of the Clearfield trait. Compared to CDC Invincible, Jiminy yields 12% higher in the south and 20% higher in the north. And 2024 was the first year of certified seed sales. And this variety is a conventional small green lentil, 6795-12. And this represents the second of the 2 final releases from SPG through the variety release program. It is a conventional small green lentil with high yield in both the north and south geographies, indicating good yield stability. It shows a 14 to 21% yield advantage versus CDC Maxim in 2 years of testing in the regional variety trials, which is the first table. And in 2 years of co-op testing, it yielded 128% of CDC Maxim, which is a 27% increase over CDC Invincible. Seed size is larger than Invincible. Disease resistance is similar. It is taller than both Maxim and Invincible and has good lodging resistance. Okay, now we're going to talk about chickpeas. We're starting to see positive uptake of new higher yielding chickpea varieties. CDC Leader has dominated chickpea acres since 2019, and that's the yellow line, and now occupies 55% of Saskatchewan chickpea acres. However, in recent years, newer varieties are starting to replace CDC Leader. This includes CDC Lancer, released in 2019, CDC Orkney from 2020, as well as 2021 releases CDC Pearl and CDC Pasqua. We look at yield performance and other traits of the Kabuli chickpea varieties. There are some strong varieties. CDC Lancer has been designated as the new check, so these are comparisons to that variety. CDC Orkney is currently the highest yielding Kabuli chickpea in the dark brown soil zone, and it ties with CDC Lancer in the brown soil zone. It matures a bit later than CDC Lancer, but it has a larger seed size. CDC Pearl and CDC Pasqua both the largest and the smallest seed size. CDC Pasqua is capable of producing 10 millimeter seed, and the small seeded CDC Pearl, which has very good yield, is gaining interest, and candy markets have been developed for this variety. There were 2 new varieties released in 2024, and this is CDC Climax and CDC Hardy, both with good yield, particularly in the dark brown soil zone. And CDC Hardy does have a bit of a smaller seed than CDC Climax. However, CDC Hardy has the best disease tolerance rating for ascochyta blight. So in the Pulse Quality Program, one of the traits is looking at seed size in chickpeas. It's another trait that is important for this crop type. We are seeing increase in seed size in varieties developed by Bunyamin at the Crop Development Center. CDC Pasqua has the largest seed size to date. However, 2 new experimental varieties developed by the CDC had the largest seed size overall, and that's these 2 here at the top. And I think Bunyamin will probably have more information for you later in this webinar. Environment is an important trait in influencing seed size, and we saw statistically significant location by variety interaction. So indicates which variety is significantly different than another, changes by location.
Laurie,
The overall yield at each location, pardon me?
Laurie, this is your 2-minute warning.
Okay. The overall lead at each location correlated with seed size. So you can see that the largest seed were at locations that had high yield, around 4,000 kilograms per hectare, with the smallest ones at the poorer yielding sites at 1,500 kilograms per hectare. Now, Faba bean, we're starting to see positive uptake of low Vicine, Convicine varieties that are replacing the high Vicine varieties such as Snowbird, which is represented here by the dark blue line. Snowbird has dominated Faba bean acres since 2017. However, with the development of low Vicine, Convicine varieties, these acres have started to decline in favor of the low Vicine varieties. Varieties gaining acres are the colored flower tannin variety Fabel, which is the yellow line here, and the low Vicine, Convicine, low tannin white flowered variety Navi, which is the gray line. Meanwhile, there are several new varieties in seed multiplication which are showing positive yields. And here we can see that there are several of these varieties that offer competitive yield versus Snowbird. In 4 years of head-to-head testing, 2018 to 2021, when these varieties were tested against Snowbird, Navi yielded 107% of Snowbird, which is the yellow column, and the 3 low Vicine, Convicine Faba bean varieties released by SPG all had higher yield compared to Snowbird, with CDC 1089 yielding 109% of Snowbird. In long-term regional variety trial data, percent yield versus Navi ranges from 95 to 102% of the check, and that is in the blue column. All 3 of these numbered varieties mature 4 to 5 days earlier than Navi and approximately 2 days later than Snowbird. The seed size of the SPG release varieties is smaller than traditional Faba bean varieties, which makes seeding operations easier and more economical. So you can see the smaller seed size of those varieties. There are also quite a few new varieties up and coming for the tannin types, and some of these also have quite a bit of a yield bump, especially Futura and Hammer, so these will be up and coming. And as I near the end, this is just a note that low Vicine, Convicine varieties released by SPG were done in a closed loop system for both seed and commercial production. And this is to ensure that the low Vicine, Convicine trade is managed and contamination from cross-pollination is controlled. Testing of seed production is mandatory to ensure Vicine and Convicine levels remain at acceptable levels. So these varieties were released to Saskatchewan growers in a non-exclusive royalty-free sublicense, and 2 have been sublicensed outside of Saskatchewan via exclusive royalty-bearing structure. And you can see the different organizations that have sublicenses for these varieties. So I want to thank you for listening to my presentation. For all of the select seed growers listening, I wanted to say on behalf of myself and Cheryl Gore that it's been a pleasure working with you throughout the duration of the Variety Release Program. We've enjoyed bringing you new varieties each spring. And as you can see, there are many more new varieties coming out of various pulse breeding programs, and I look forward to seeing ongoing improvements in pulse profitability for our growers. If you have any questions for me, please type them into Slido and we will address them in the Q&A discussion at the end of the session. So next, we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Tom Warkentin, professor at the University of Saskatchewan's Crop Development Center and Ministry of Agriculture Strategic Research Program Chair in Pulse Crop Breeding and Genetics. His research is focused on the development of superior field pea and soybean cultivars for Western Canadian environments. So welcome, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Laurie, for the kind introduction. Thank you to SaskPulse for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing. Can everybody see my slides? First slide?
Yes, that looks great, Tom.
Okay, great. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the co-authors of my talk, Kishore, Davini, Carmen, Tadesse, Donna, Loveleen, Stephen, and Sabina. Here's the outline of my presentation today. I've been asked to share with you about some updates on the work we're doing on nitrogen fixation in pea, root rots, varieties, and what's coming. This slide summarizes the objectives of the CDC pea breeding program from 2023 to 28. And I begin by mentioning high yielding. Of course, as a plant breeder, high yielding is a key thing that we want to achieve. And I've marked that in bold font. Also marked increased BNF, that stands for biological nitrogen fixation. Increased root rot resistance, also in bold print, because those are the topics in the presentation today. But note, increased seed protein concentration is important, increased heat and drought tolerance, as well as increased resistance to the foliar disease like the Ascochyta complex. So let's start with biological nitrogen fixation. You see the nice nodules on these pea plants. And this is word for word the first objective of my Pulse Cluster project, increasing biological nitrogen fixation in pea. And a benefit of that is lowering greenhouse gas emissions and facilitating high protein yield for the plant-based protein markets. That's kind of a mouthful, but nevertheless, nitrogen fixation. And I'll tell you, it's not a simple goal. Nitrogen fixation is complicated. If it was easy, I'm sure we'd have N-fixing wheat and canola by now. I'll tell you the background of this story very briefly through these 4 published papers. And we started delving into this topic about 10, 15 years ago when Hossein Zakari, who completed his PhD in ag bio here at the U of S, and he was looking to start a postdoc. He said, I think we should try to improve N-fix in pea. I heard about these nitrogen fixing nodulation mutants from the UK. Maybe we could use those in a program. So we applied to ADF and fortunately got funded. But the problem was, in the short term anyway, that Hossein left the country, went to the US for a job. And I was very fortunate to be able to hire Chao Yang. We call him Tony. Tony is the name he uses mostly to take on this work. So Tony evaluated these, let me just get this. He evaluated these mutant lines in field trials in Western Canada, and they looked reasonable. They weren't super high yielding, but they were okay. They were actually a little bit too early maturing for our season. Nevertheless, he got going with those and also crossed them to CDC Meadow and CDC Dakota, which at the time were quite good varieties in our program. And then we took that on as a separate small breeding activity. Tony also evaluated those lines when inoculated with various strains of rhizobia and saw some strain by variety interactions. Fast forward a few years to 2019, Loveleen Carr Dillon joined our group as a PhD student, and by then, the 400 or 500 or 700 lines arising from Tony's work were narrowed down to the best 20 in terms of their agronomic performance. So Loveleen evaluated those in detail in 5 or 6 trials over a couple of years and published that result in Field Crops Research. She showed that some of those lines had slightly higher N fixation, they had decent yield, they had some improvement in protein in some cases. So it looked a bit promising that we should carry on this activity. And as a sort of a side study in her PhD, Loveleen looked at the roots of these lines plus some other diverse pea lines. and looked at their seedling architecture, because we think in the big scheme of things, the right root architecture is important. So fast forward to now to 2024 and the Pulse Cluster P project. And this slide was developed by Tadesse, who's a research officer in our group. Basically, we said, let's look at the lines in our breeding program. Do they differ in their ability to fix N? And in the coming years, we'll repeat this work with new lines entering these pre-co-op stages. And so basically he sampled, him and Donna Lindsay did this work this summer. They sampled 3 stems per plot out of a large number of plots, and dried the tissue, grind it up, encapsulate, and then test by mass spec. It's a technique where you can see the differences in 15N versus 14N, and it's a measure of percent nitrogen derived from atmosphere. So it's a measure of nitrogen fixation. This work was done at our Sutherland location near Saskatoon with 2 reps. So it's only 1 year, but anyway, it's a way to start the process. And here's a summary of the results. So we had 10 different trials, and each of these trials had 32 entries plus 4 checks. So it's quite a few varieties. And so what I'm showing here is the grain yield, the percent NDFA, that's percent nitrogen derived from atmosphere. So the bigger the number, the more N fixed there was, and the number of lines that had higher NDFA than the mean of the 4 checks. And so what I want to point out is that in the trials where the yield was higher, so these were yields like 40 to 50 bushels per acre, generally when the yield was higher, the percent NDFA was also higher. And that makes sense. Good nitrogen fixation could lead to more yield. And I want to point out this this overview aerial photo, thanks to Connor from Steve Shirtliff's group for taking this picture in mid-season. And what I noted here is a little bit of a lighter green stretch there, and that coincided with P Advanced 4, 6, and 7, where the yield was lower and the N fix was lower. So it kind of makes sense. If the plants are suffering from root rot, they may not fix as much N. And so here we come to our nemesis, the root rot complex. You've seen these pictures before. Aphanomyces is the main culprit. Fusarium avinaceum is another one. Fusarium solani and other fusariums. So again, here's my objective from my pulse cluster proposal: increasing root health in P to support higher biological nitrogen fixation through rhizobium nodulation, again to lower GHGs, increase carbon sequestration, and lots of good stuff like that. So what have we done? We've been working on root rot resistance for some time. A lot of collaboration with Dr. Sabine Banniza, who you're going to hear from later this morning. We've taken a molecular breeding approach, breeding for root rot resistance, sort of like breeding for nitrogen fixation. It's complicated. If it was easy, it would have been done already. What we've done is built on the work of our colleagues in France and the US, who identified various what we call QTLs. These are regions in the P genome associated with some amount of resistance. And then we pyramided using 2 streams like this, and at the bottom we get lines that are carrying at least 2 of those favorable QTLs. If lucky, in a sense, we were bringing in some of the so-called minor QTLs as well. At many stages of this process, this took a few years, we did marker-assisted selection, MAS, to make sure we had the QTLs we were shooting for. Also, we phenotyped, meaning we checked the plants for their disease levels at those 2 stages. So here's a little bit of the output of that work. I've also shown this slide in the past, but I think it's quite informative. You see CDC Meadow, the most widely grown variety, as Laurie pointed out, having root discoloration levels about 80%. Here's the CDC varieties that we used as the parents that we wanted to bring the resistance into. Here were the sources of resistance from old research from 30, 40 years ago from John Kraft and others. And here in green are some of the breeding lines arising from those crosses, and you see they look kind of favorable. 30, 40, 20% root discoloration. None of them had 0 or 10, by the way. And so the most promising lines were tested in yield trials. We started to develop breeder seed, and they were in the co-op registration trials in 23 and 24. But unfortunately, we're not going to release them. And the reason is that although I'm going to explain in the next slide that they had some improvement in resistance, we only did this kind of as a pilot project, and we didn't have a huge number of lines that had good resistance. And so the ones we picked just didn't have quite enough yield. But I'll give you some good news about that in a moment. Here's our root rot nursery developed over the last 7 or so years. It's about an acre just in the Saskatoon area. We jam in as many pea and lentil plots as we can. They're short rows. It's intense. We irrigate them with drip irrigation, and we have to dig up the plants to look at the roots, wash them, and score them. So this slightly complicated graph is what I want to show you from this past year. So at the top frame, we have all the varieties from CDC that were in the co-op trials. And at this far end are the ones that arose from molecular breeding. So the average score from 3 locations of testing of these guys was better than the others. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And as a supplementary study, we tested all the varieties 50 plus that are in the seed guides in Western Canada to see if in the short term we could find some that were a bit better than others. And there wasn't a huge difference, but there is a small difference, and we're going to repeat that trial next year, and we'll use that information to update the seed guides. I want to tell you a little bit about this panel that we call GWAS2, basically just to say that it's a diverse panel of pea varieties from a lot of different sources. And so we're evaluating that panel for Phanomyces resistance. Can we find new sources of resistance? Well, we didn't find anything that had 0 to 30% disease, but we found some that had certainly less than many of the existing varieties. So we're a bit positive about that. Kishore here is doing a GWAS analysis. Basically, it's looking at the DNA profile of all those lines compared to their disease scores. And when you see a little dot up here at the top, we get all excited about that because that could be a marker associated with resistance somewhere in the pea genome. Fusarium avinaceum is also important, and Stephen Awadelli is a PhD student who's doing the work on that. When we screen the GWAS panel, actually we see several lines that have low disease, but science is always a bit complicated, and what we found was that all of these with the lowest disease were ones with purple flowers and pigmented seed coat, where most of the production of pea in the Canadian prairies is the white flower type. So obviously it takes some more work to delve into that. And again, here's Kishore looking for some markers that are associated with Fusarium avinaceum. So if I kind of summarize in a very brief way our timeline on root rot resistance breeding, identifying and combining QTLs from published sources was our first step, exploring new sources of resistance, and now pyramiding those best sources into high-yielding backgrounds and doing it at scale. I want to emphasize that at scale. We're doing it in a big way now. Back here, it was sort of on a smaller scale. We're ramping it up, and I think we should have the next cohort of lines with better resistance entering the co-op by next year. Very briefly, high-yielding varieties. Laurie already summarized this quite well. Coming from CDC, these are a variety of yellow that we've released and greens over the last decade or so. And here's their here are all the varieties that have at least 1% of the area in Western Canada in 2024. So these are coming from the crop insurance agencies of the 3 provinces. Briefly, one slide to tell you about the newest ones coming from our program. Boundless and Engage were released in 2023. Canuck now in 24. Comparing them here to Amarillo from 2012, you see some boosts in yield. Reasonable for lodging, for Mycosphaerella. Some of them have a little boost in protein, medium seed weight, and all 3 of them definitely have a improved seed coat breakage compared to Amarillo. These have been released to Secan, Alliance, and Secan. Finally, some crazy ones, specialty pea options. We have these potentially coming available very soon. One that's a wrinkled type, a red one, maple, and dun. In each case, they have some improvements in grain yield compared to the existing. So overall, in plant breeding, we try to combine a lot of things into the final product to reach the growers. Obviously, it's complicated. Obviously, it takes time. Obviously, we have to make some compromises along the way, but we try our best to give you something that's exciting at the end of the day. So I wrap up with that with acknowledgments. First off to the senior technicians in the CDC program that you see on the outsides of this graph. All of them have been with our program for 10 plus years, some of them much more than that. So thanks to them for the hard work, for all the other folks that I have the privilege to work with. Thanks to SPG and many others for funding support. So I wrap it up with that, Laurie. I hope I didn't go too far over time.
No, that was great, Tom. Thank you so much. It's really exciting to see the research that you're doing. If you have questions, please enter them in Slido using event code 3760904, and we will address them in the Q&A session. So our next presentation is about Limagrain's accelerated breeding program for peas and lentils. This is brought to you by Benzon Lorenzana, who is Limagrain's head of cereals and pulses research in North America. Benzon brings over 15 years of research management and leadership experience. He holds master's and PhD degrees in applied plant sciences from the University of Minnesota, specializing in plant breeding and molecular genetics. So welcome, Benzon.
Thank you for the introduction, Laurie. Can you see the slide?
Yes, that looks great.
All righty, sounds good. And thank you for the invitation to speak today, this seminar. So I'm here to talk about Limagrain's efforts in accelerating peas and lentils new variety development. The original title is Accelerated Breeding, but then I realized our colleagues there at GIFS, Global Institute of Food Security, actually has a unit, right, called Accelerated Breeding. And if I continue to use that, I might get an infringement call from them. So that's why I changed it to Accelerating Peas and Lentils New Variety Development. So. All right, so for my talk today, I have 4 key topics. So first, I would recap the key breeding objectives that we shared last year in this seminar with my colleague Janet Terscure, the pulse breeder at Saskatoon. I will provide some key updates as well in our efforts, some highlights in our breeding pipeline, and finally acknowledgements on the people that's actually doing the work in Canada. So for our key breeding objectives, like I said, we presented this last year, and then I presented this we presented this back in early 2024. In the past year, we've validated our key breeding objectives in peas, which is high yield, phanomyces in Fusarium root rot resistance, lodging, seed coat breakage, and bleaching in green peas. We do have other traits that we're looking at, but these would be the key traits in our breeding efforts. So for lentils, we're focusing on herbicide tolerance, yield, ascochyte of light, and also phanomyces in the Fusarium root rot. For some key updates in 2024, you can see in here a graph of the experiment performed by Dr. Antena Feisa, the plant pathologist for LCRC based in Saskatoon. So we'd like to recognize here that the phanomyces isolates that we used in this study was provided by Dr. Chatterton at AFC. So in this graph, you can see the results of 2 experiments, experiment 1 and experiment 2. These 2 experiments used different isolates. And in these experiments, we gathered lines from 3 different partial resistance sources. So the first source would be the CDC source, the Canadian source. I believe Dr. Warkentin covered this in the previous presentation. And then we also gathered new sources from 2 European populations. So as you can see in here. Now we were encouraged by this result because, as you can see, if you look at the bottom left of the graph, those would be what we would consider the more resistant materials, and towards the top and towards the right would be the more susceptible materials. As you can see, in red font are the lines that are commercially available right now. And you can see that we have consistent partial resistant lines that we've identified. And we've commenced, or we've proceeded to stack all of these partial resistance sources, and this effort is ongoing. We're also continuing to work with SPG to scale up the controlled environment root rot screening capacities, while at the same time continuing to screen internally. We are also continuing to, or we have also initiated a few cerium root rot screening internally within Limagrain. And again, this is just to acknowledge that this work is done by Dr. Antena Felisa. One exciting update also would be that in terms of genotyping and analytics, we have built our genomic selection training set, and this work is done by Dr. Xiaoming Wang, which is our breeding support scientist based in Saskatchewan. So with Xiaoming's work, we have built a set of phenotypic data for our initial PEACE genomic selection training set. So genomic selection, a lot of the breeders are familiar with this, but for those that are less familiar, so it's a tool that combines molecular marker information and data that we have in our database, data on different traits, and genetic modeling to come up with a better estimate of the genetic or breeding value of the different lines that we have in the program, or that we develop in the breeding program. We can even use this to predict the value of a line even without testing them in the field. So the high density genotyping or molecular marker fingerprinting of lines are ongoing for the P lines that are in our genomic selection training set, as well as new lines in our field trials in the next year. The high density genotyping platform for lentils will be available this year as well. Third key update that I'd like to share with everyone here would be in terms of seed phenotyping. So we've acquired a machine from Vibe. It's called the Vibe Seed Analyzer for rapid and accurate seed phenotyping. And seed characterization is in full swing in the pulses breeding program in Saskatchewan. And then lastly, in terms of counter season nurseries, we have sent test nurseries with our partners in Chile and New Zealand. And counter season nurseries are crucial in our effort to accelerate breeding and varietal delivery. And in fact, right now, our breeder, Janet, she could be listening right now, but she wasn't sure because she was traveling in Chile to look at and evaluate these nurseries. So as you can see in the map, we have a couple test nurseries in Chile. We have one in New Zealand. We continue to use our counter season nursery in Yuma in Arizona. Just to mention also that we have colleagues. We have there's a Limagrain presence in Chile, and those are part of the people that we're working with there to establish our counter season capacities. Next, for breeding pipeline highlights. So you can see in here a general description of the breeding workflow within our pulses breeding program. So we start with the germplasm pool, and then we continue with parent selection, breeding crosses, and line development, and then internal field evaluation before we go to the registration trials and supporting our varieties for registration, and followed by commercialization. So what we've enabled in the past year would be root rot screening in different stages of this workflow. So we were able to screen the germplasm pool and also lines at different stages in our breeding pipeline. In terms of molecular marker genotyping, you can see here we've enabled genotyping in different stages in the breeding program as well. And then finally, in terms of seed phenotyping, you can see here that we've enabled it. We've enabled seed phenotyping as well on different stages in the breeding program. In terms of germplasm pool, like we mentioned earlier, we've assembled the Canadian and European germplasm and made more than hundreds of breeding populations, including Aphanomyces multisource and Aphanomyces and stacks with lines that we've acquired that could have fusarium resistance. We've generated thousands and thousands of F4 lines, and many of these contain the single source Aphanomyces partial resistance. And 2024, we were able to generate as well hundreds with stacked source Aphanomyces partial resistance QTLs. And we expect to generate even more in this coming year. We tested more than 6,000 lines up to 9 locations in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba, using more than 13,000 plots in total. And then in registration trials, we have 8 P lines in year 1 and 6 P lines in year 2. And then earlier in 2024, we had 1 yellow P variety supported for registration. Now, the P varieties with stacked Aphanomyces partial resistance are expected to be supported for registration in 2030. And we project this based on, you can see here the number of years that it takes us to go through each stage. And these lines are the ones that are coming off of this stage right here. In terms of lentils, we've enabled as well seed phenotyping across different stages. Our root radish screening right now is focused on peas. So root radish screening will be done for lentils at a later date. In terms of genotyping, like I mentioned, the high density platform will be available this year, but we do have some limited genotyping done already for lentils, or being done for lentils. Now, in terms of germplasm pool, we're working mainly with Canadian sources, although we've started to look at other sources as well. We've generated hundreds of breeding populations, and most of these with herbicide tolerance and clear field, and generated thousands of F4 lines. More than 2,000 lines were tested in up to 5 locations in Saskatchewan and Alberta in 2024, with 6,000 total plots. And then 8 lentil lines are in year 1 and 9 lentil lines in year 2 registration trials. And finally, early in 2024, we had 3 small red varieties, 1 large green variety, and 1 Spanish brown lentil varieties that were supported for registration. So this is a quick snapshot of the breeding pipeline we have in our Saskatoon Pulses breeding program. I realize I kind of went through it quickly, but before I end, I'd like to acknowledge the Limagrain Cereals Research Canada research team. First, of course, our pulse breeder there, Janet Terescure. Also, our breeding support scientist, Xiaoming Huang, and Antenna Fiisa, that works closely with Janet. Tim Van Steenbergen, our research station manager, and his team, field operations team, and our plant production hub. Lorena Paul, our commercial product development manager, who's really playing a key part in bringing the materials that we develop in the breeding program to the commercial side. And Tatiana, our CEO. Acknowledging here as well that the Limagrain's Pulse breeding program is supported by Limagrain Field Seeds, Global Cereals and Pulses Support, and Trait Technologies team. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge that the Limagrain Pulse breeding program in Saskatoon is jointly funded by Saskatchewan Pulse Growers and Limagrain. And with that, again, thank you for this opportunity to provide you with updates regarding the Limagrain Pulse breeding program at Saskatoon.
Oh, thank you so much, Benzon. Again, it's exciting to see the progress that is being made. If you have questions for Benzon, please enter them in Slido using event code 3760904. And again, we'll address them in the Q&A session. Up next, we have Dr. Bunyamin, a professor at the University of Saskatchewan's Crop Development Center and the Ministry of Agriculture Strategic Research Program Chair in Chickpea and Flax Breeding and Genetics. His research is focused on the development of superior chickpea and flax cultivars for Western Canadian environments. So welcome, Bunyamin.
Thank you very much, Laurie. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to give an update of the chickpea breeding at the Crop Development Center. Now I'm trying to open the file. Can you see it?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay. So today, I'll give you a bit of an overview of what we are doing here with the breeding and the update of the new varieties and what's coming into the pipelines. So just a reminder for you guys, the growers out there, this is an old school, as I said. Keep your rotation and diversify yourself. Okay, so this is an example of 4-year rotation and a colorful picture, of course, and you have cereal and you have oilseed dividing between the two cereals, and you have pulses, either pea, lentil, chickpea, bean, faba bean, no, even you have soybean into the landscape. So keep your rotation and it works, okay? And if you are in areas where you have problem with aphanomyces or other kind of root rots, then you may extend this rotation. Instead of 4 years, you may extend it to 8 years. So that's the reality that we are having now, okay? So again, this is nothing new about it. This is an old school, but it works, okay? So keep it that. And so this is where we are now in terms of the chickpea acreage in Canada and mostly in Saskatchewan. So over 95% of chickpea production in Canada is in Saskatchewan. So you see there's a big increase in 2024. So from 2022, we have about over like 235,000 acres and increased to 316,000 acres. And in 2024, close to 500,000 acres of chickpea grown in Canada, and yield also improving. So the last few years, 2021, 22, 23, we had really problem with dry in many areas of the chickpea production, and 2024 is slightly improving, as you see reflected as well in the yield on average in Canada. So production in 2024 is about 327,000 metric tons. So what are we growing in 2024? So this is the variety that you guys grow. So this is the data based on the insert acreage from the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance. So over 50% of the insert acreage is CDC leader. So these are an older varieties. So and people still like the quality perhaps on this variety, and larger seeds and relatively early on maturity side. So leader still dominating the acreage, and Orion is really getting down now. And the newer one is coming to the plate now, to the landscape. So CDC Lancer, Orkney, Pearl, and Pasqua. So there's some older varieties like B90 or Frontier, but again, the acreage is really going down significantly. So where are chickpea being grown? So as you see here, chickpea mostly grown in the southwest of the province, so in the dark brown and brown soil zones, and more now is kind of moving to the east. Okay, so just be careful when you are in the south from Regina and southeast from Regina with heavy soil. Okay, so when that's not really ideal for chickpea, but you can grow in the dry when we have like a dry season in the last few years. So this is mostly concentrated where chickpea are being grown in the south, central, and really the south part of the province. Okay, and this is the map given by Saskatchewan Crop Insurance. So this is the Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. So this is the areas that will be covered if you insure your acreage. Okay, so if you are outside this area, you are far north, for example, PA or like a Meadow Lake, so probably you better off growing other pulses instead of chickpeas. So don't push too much on the chickpea, because chickpea is really well adapted to the drier regions of the province. Okay, so look into this map here, and what is your risk zone, and if you're thinking about to insure your acres, so you're going through contact crop insurance and ask about this area of coverage. So for the breeding itself, of course, yield and yield stability, you have heard from Tom before, and which is really important. So yield stability, we look at the data of our trial over years. So usually we rarely release data based on 1 or 2 years. Usually we had multiple years of data from the regional test. We have enough sufficient station year data so that we're confident when we release the varieties, it is going to be good one. And of course, this is resistance. So the main continuing disease that we are working on is on Ascochyta blight. And on the opportunity basis, we also look into wilt and root rot. So this is kind of just an opportunity. When we see the symptom, then we make that selection negative and remove the line that's showing the symptom. And also we still working on the herbicide tolerance. Right now, most all the new varieties will have imidazoline intolerance, but also we are expanding to a new mode of action, for example, to improve for resistance to metribuzin. So this is part of the cluster project that also partly funded by SPG. And abiotic stress tolerance, we work on the heat tolerance right now. So we make a good progress, identified a good source for heat tolerance in chickpeas and some other stress. So we use that now into the breeding, start feeding into the program in the crosses. And quality, of course, is really critical, especially for Kabuli. This includes the larger seed size, seed shapes, and color. And also we do some in-house testing for processing with the help of the Dr. Jean Arganosa from the Green Innovation Lab. So we do some canning and milling efficiency of the new lines before we release. So we have the data internally. And also we're looking at the nutritional quality on the varieties that we release, especially on protein and oil content. So in chickpeas, people like to have a high protein content. And in oil, between Kabuli and Desi, kind of their contrasting desire for oil content. In Desi, they like to have a much lower oil content, less than 2%, whereas in Kabuli type, the processor like to have higher oil content because that make a better quality or better taste. Okay, so this is the seed guide. I just pick up here or just the newer line that we have. Okay, so you can see Laurie also has mentioned this in the morning. This morning, just an hour or so ago. So we have a choice here for you guys from Lancer and the two newer lines that we have, CDC Climax and CDC Hardy. And as you see here, these two lines been tested in regional about 5 years before we release and put into the seed guide. And Leader still there, and we have Orkney, Pasco, and Pearl. Okay, Orkney is one of the highest yielding on both brown and dark brown soil zone with reasonable Ascochyta blot resistance. Okay, and it's a medium lead varieties, and seed size quite comparable with Leader. Okay, so and we also have Pasqua, which is the largest seed size available at the moment. Okay, and the Climax and Hardy, as I said, is the newer one with improved Ascochyta resistance, especially for Hardy. Okay, and this is the variety that will be available in the near future. Okay, so this is the entries that we will have in 2025 regional test. So entry check is CDC Lancer. Okay, and then we have two new lines that we released in 2024, Climax and Hardy. And we have one new line, entry number 8 here, 3789, which is the largest Cabulis. So this is a improvement from CDC Pasqua. So it's improved for Ascochyta black and larger seed size, and also yield comparable. So this is from the data in 2024. You can see it's quite high yielding compared to Pasqua. And then there's a couple of other lines, Cabulis, still in the regional test, and we also have one DESI. And then on the yellow highlighted here, this is the first new entries that will go into regional test in 2025. And as you see, based on the data in 2023 and 2024, is quite high yielding, and also with larger seed size. Okay, so we are pushing really on the seed size and keep pushing on the yield on all the newer varieties that we release. And again, this is just a visual look when you see CDC Hardy, CDC Climax, and CDC 3789-7. Okay, comparison of the seed size, 354 on average for Hardy, Climax about 374, which is similar to Leader, and then 3789 is 450, so mostly at the 10 mil seed size for 3789. And when you look at this is the data based on 1 year in 2023, when we look at the oil and protein content of the new line that we have. So we have Lancer, Leader, Orkney, Pasqua, Climax, and CDC Pearl and Hardy. So on average, the oil content ranges from 6.0 to 7.8, which is on CDC Orkney. And protein content ranges from 19 to 24%. So apparently, the two new lines that we have right now, for example, the 3789, a larger seed size, average oil content about 6.2%, and slightly higher protein, 24%. So this is a plus for this new line beside the seed size that we are that including the variety. So this is the data done by Dr. Regina Arganosa from the Green Innovation Lab. So in the pipelines, we continue looking into the seed size and improvement of all disease. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge cooperator and also our technical staff from the PULSE program, and a student working on the project, as well as cooperator and from breeder seed facility, Benalak and Craig Health, Green Innovation Lab, Gina Ganosa, CDC Pulse Pathology Program, and all collaborators at CDC and UFS, former student, technician, postdoc, and all international collaborators. And with that, also acknowledge the funding from Government of Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, from the cluster program, WGRF. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bunyamin. It's exciting to see the lineup that you have coming in your program and the improvements in seed size. So if you have questions, please enter them in Slido using event code 3760904. And again, we'll address them in the Q&A session. So our next presenter is Dr. Anna Vargas, also of the Crop Development Center. Anna is currently supervising 6 graduate students and is teaching plant breeding to 4th-year students in the Plant Sciences Department. She's excited about contributing to crop improvements to address the main challenges in lentil and faba beans, including root rot and herbicide tolerance in lentil and seed quality in faba beans. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Laurie. Before I start, I want to ask if you can see my presentation in presenter mode.
Yes, that looks great, Anna.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about Vicine and Convicine, a very big, important topic for faba beans right now. So I am going to discuss a little bit about what Vicine and Convicine are. I thought I should provide a little bit of history in case we're not fully familiar what these compounds are. and also how to quantify them, what do we do in the breeding program, and I thought I should also mention some implications for growers. So when we faba beans are used as food, feed, forage in the world, I really like to describe them as a nitrogen fixing machine, not only because I am a nitrogen fixation person, but just because it is amazing the ability that faba beans has to fix nitrogen. And I think this is very important for when we consider including them in our growing system. And this immediately translates to very high protein content, about 24, 35% protein content, and way higher than many of the other pulses that we grow. And it has other benefits. It leaves nitrogen for subsequent crops. I think right now is particularly important, their ability to break basically the cycle of soil-borne diseases, at least for now. I don't even want to say it out loud. And then as far as consumption goes, in the world is consumed as immature, or the immature seeds are consumed either fresh or frozen. People cook them directly, or they are sell commercialized cans. And what I want to point out here is that I think we have a lot of opportunity, as producers, as processors, and like protein fractionators. Oh, for some reason, this isn't switching. Okay, so fava beans are well adapted to a very diverse climate conditions, northern temperate, Mediterranean, subtropical, savanna. About 5.4 metric tons are produced in the world. Most of it is China. Again, I think there is a lot of opportunity here for Canada to increase fava bean production, and also not only for exportation but also for local markets. A little bit of history. When we think about fava beans, if we go very back in history, they were very controversial, especially in the Mediterranean region where they come from, or where the most diversity of fava beans has been found, because we know there are no wild ancestors that we know of anymore. But where this diversity come from, and the cultivation was actually banned in that region, and the reason was because it was associated even with death and decay, and part of the reason of this was because fava beans have Vicine and Convicine, which cause what we know as favism, which is acute hemolytic anemia. So basically, these are molecules that can cause a reaction in genetically susceptible individuals that are GCDP deficient. About 400 million people in the planet has this susceptibility. We know it's about 4.9% of the population. However, some populations in the world, like Italy, India, has 33% susceptible individuals. We also know it's X chromosome, or the gene is in the X chromosome. So usually the susceptibility is more severely expressed in men. Why will plants have such complicated compounds, right? And in nature, basically, Vicine and Convicine were very important for the plant to have some antibiotic effect in some other larva or any phytophagous pest. But we have other ways to basically deal with those modernly. So Vicine and Convicine can be in all parts of the plant. So the highest concentration we know is in seeds, and we know basically both compounds are synthesized during pod filling. Test out the seed, so it's really not safe to consume. However, pollen is safe, meaning like if we that's why we can grow high Vicine and Convicine and be in a field out there. Plants will flower and nothing will happen. I mentioned about all parts of the plant because in some places, and part of what we expect that we could do with Faba in the future is eat other parts of the plant, not only the seed. It has been also defined that ingesting large portions of low Vicine Convicine after these compounds were removed is completely safe for these individuals. This has been tested, so there are no concerns basically to have low Vicine Convicine varieties in the human food chain. These are not only specific to fava beans, and this is very important because we know of other plants and families in the Baesis and Cucurbitaceae families, like bitter melon, who has the same compounds. So this is actually great because we can, in the sense that we can be more of a bigger community studying the compound and trying to better understand the biochemical pathway. I am having trouble for some reason moving the slides. So when we think about how we deal with this, basically in the industry, a lot of options has been considered. Although Vicine and Convicine are thermostable, any thermal process can reduce the amount of the compound, but not enough to be safe for humans by boiling, roasting, microwaving, irradiating, or frying. Fermentation has also been considering. When it comes to fractionating protein, we know dry fractionation is not an option because basically the process increases Vicine and Convicine in a 4 or 2A fold even. Wet fractionation works, but I would say, so the problem basically with all of these options is that it's costly, is very resource intensive. We will also know that alters the native functionality of the ingredient, and at the end is not 100% safe. And I think it's very important that we see how radical we need to be in the sense of not having any, just because any that we might put in anything in the food chain will actually turn out into really bad reputation for favas. So the option is basically breeding. About 15 years ago, a line was identified by the Poland Department of Plant Genetic Resources that was low Vicine and Convicine. And a lot of research has happened since then, basically to elucidate the genetics controlling this trait. So we know it's a single recessive character. And in very simple terms, this means that it's genetically fairly easy to work with and basically include in our germoplasm. And just more modernly, we know there are another few other regions in the genome that have also something in the pathway of forming these compounds. However, I think we're very close to fully understanding this full pathway. And this basically opened the possibilities for us to breed for low Vicine and Convicine. Many of the bigger programs in the world, including us, Finland, Denmark, the UK, have switched to low Vicine Convicine. And in our case, our program is 100% low Vicine and Convicine, and zero tannin, but that's a different topic. So how do we quantify Vicine and Convicine? Liquid chromatography is a good option, and this is I think what most of the companies offering the services to quantify Vicine and Convicine use. We really don't even need to know what this means. I actually don't know what the whole thing means, but Dr. Purves in Pharmacy and Nutrition here developed basically the most efficient and accurate approach for quantifying these compounds. The situation is the molecule is really, really small. So it was very difficult to identify it, but they have successfully done it. In terms of our program, I think this will work for people testing 1 or 2 samples, or if they can pay the amount. In our case, it's very costly and time consuming. It worked for us in the sense of developing and understanding the pathway, but not as has a way to assist our breeding program. And just for people to, this is extremely tiny, but basically when you send a sample, you will get a report that tells you how much Vicine, how much Convicine you have. Um, I recently embarked, and this is part of an effort that we are doing as a low Vicine and Convicine committee, in the journey of basically evaluating a lot of the breeding germplasm. So far, most of it comes below 0.1%, but hopefully I will have a full report by the PGDC meeting to present. Instead of program, saw the necessity to develop a molecular market. So a very robust, and again, because it's controlled by a few genes, it was very easy to do actually. Develop a Cas marker that basically tells you have it or you don't. And because the the compound is in the actual, or the market is in the actual gene, is very safe, let's say, to use the Cas marker. So the results are really rapid, and this works better for us. We can run samples at $1, $2.50, depending on the volume that we have, compared to $100, $150 that LC will cost. And this is for those of you who might have some curiosity to learn more about it. This is the publication and how the market was developed. And I think this in particular might be of interest for a lot of people, which is basically how the process of eliminating this was, and considering history and all these interesting aspects. I have to say in general that in faba beans, they have a big genome. So there hasn't been a lot of advances in genomics compared to most of the crops that we work with. Fortunately, 2 years ago, the faba bean genome was released and is publicly available. So I think this is going to be a very important resource for our program to start elucidating the full pathway of Vicine and Convicine, and also so many other aspects of the crop that are of economic importance and relevant to our province. So in the process of switching, how do we switch to a whole low Vicine and Convicine system, right? What does it take to remove the conventional varieties from the system? As I mentioned, there is a low Vicine and Convicine committee. SPG is leading this effort. We have public and private breeders, growers. SPG again is leading processors, growers. So everybody has come together to understand what needs to change in the regulation, and CFAIA is actually looking for input from this committee. We also think that deregistration of varieties need to happen, and basically breeders will need to decide the fate of their varieties, right? While we are in this process of switching, it's very important that we keep our low Vicine and Convicine production lots very isolated. We are recommending 5 kilometers to any high Vicine and Convicine field. However, I think we need to remind that there is a good level of a significant level of outcrossing in faba beans. So basically, as far as a bee can fly, can get pollen and contaminate, right? So it's going to take basically from our side to come up with very strong agronomic type varieties that people are really enthusiastic to grow. In terms of management, I mean, it's pretty much the same, other than, again, isolating while there are other high Vicine and Convicine around. Again, our program is all low Vicine and Convicine. We are also zero tannin, and we will continue to focus on this because we believe that this is what we need to be doing in terms of the possibilities in the near future. So why do we need to transition? And I really wanted to put this into simple words, and I believe it's because we will have endless opportunities. This opens the door for faba beans to be exploited in the human food chain, and the possibilities are endless. I just wanted to include a few, like fava bean shoots are not very popular. They are becoming more popular in the United States, but it's something that could become more popular, and they are very, very tasty and stir fried. If you give it a try, do it with a low bison and combicin one. And definitely there is a lot of growing interest in the food fractionation industry and product development. So we really think this is what we should be doing. So far, currently the low bison and combicin cultivars are in a closed loop model, but hopefully there will be the less need of closed loop models in the near future as we flush high bison and combicin varieties out of the system. And I thought I should include this picture just to show we had a few visitors very interested internationally from the US in growing our varieties, and there seems to be again a moment for fava beans, if I can put it that way. I just want to say thank you. I thought I should include some of the other fun stuff that we are doing. So we continue to focus mainly on light seed coat. However, we are doing some specialty classes kind of work. I don't think this isn't really clearly defined in Fabas just yet, but we are keeping some really cool zero tannin, low bison, combicin varieties with different seed coats that I really hope they are gonna find we're gonna find a home for them in specialty markets because they are beautiful and very tasty. I want to apologize in advance because I won't be able to make it to the Q&As part of the this webinar. I am teaching basically in a few minutes, but please feel free to email me any questions or comments that you have, and thank you for your attention and your interest in this topic.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. That was a great overview of where the fava bean industry is going and what the opportunities that are up and coming.
Thank you.
So as she mentioned, as Anna mentioned, she's unable to stay for the Q&A session. However, if you have questions, you can contact her at a.vargas@usask.ca. So finally, we are joined by Dr. Sabine Banniza, Professor of Plant Pathology and Strategic Research Chair for Pulse Crop Pathology at the Crop Development Center of the University of Saskatchewan, where she has been working on diseases of pea, lentil, chickpea, bean, and fava bean for more than 20 years. So she brings a great deal of expertise. So welcome, Sabine.
Thank you for the introduction. Last but not least, the messenger of bad news, as I am well known, always talking about what kills plants. So I was asked to give a presentation on disease resistance breeding. So I'm probably just filling in some of the gaps and some of the more pathology work that we are doing here in my group. So there has already been a fair bit of talk about root rots, and I just want to remind people here that root rot is caused by a mix of several pathogens. And over the last few years, we have really learned more and more about those pathogens. So I think everybody, okay. Okay, my animation doesn't work. That is not very, oh, here it goes. There are 4 pathogenic species that are really important in the pea, Aphanomyces eutychus, and then these 3 Fusarium species, Solanae, Oxysporum, and Avignacum. Unfortunately, in lentil, it is the same group of pathogens that are the primary drivers of root rot. Unfortunately, because obviously these are our 2 big pulse crops, and if there wasn't any overlap in pathogens, you could include both in a rotation and it would not have any negative impact. Now we know that in chickpea, Fusarium avignacum is also important and quite virulent. We also know Fusarium culmorum is fairly virulent. And then I added these 2 pathogens, Verticillium and Burkholliomyces, which we in surveys did not detect very often, but they are fairly well known elsewhere in the world as important root rot pathogens. So these are certainly two pathogens we want to keep an eye on. Now, just last year, we started to also have a look at faba bean root rot, and this is led by Dr. Abdel Majid at Canada at AFC Morden. And with the faba bean, there is a bit more overlap with the chickpea. So what we have found is Fusarium avianacum is very common, Fusarium culmorum, and we also were able to identify a fair bit of Fusarium acuminatum. You see that the lines are dotted. So these species have been found commonly on root rots, but we still have to do the pathogenicity testing to determine whether they are all equally virulent on faba bean as well. Now you notice that Fusarium avianacum is really the common denominator here on all of our 4 pulse crops. So that is certainly a key pathogen in all 4 pulse crops. Now, to make things a little bit more complex is that several of these species are considered species complexes or are part of species complexes. And these are Fusarium avianacum, Fusarium solani, and Fusarium oxysporum. So really the 3 Fusarium species that are of concern in pea and in lentil. Dr. Sharma Chatterton and her colleague Dr. Nora Farood are looking at Fusarium avianacum at Canada in Lethbridge, and here in my group we are looking at Fusarium solani and at Fusarium oxysporum because we want to know, well, which species specifically are infecting our pulse crops. And why that is important is A, we need to know because we have to pick the right isolates when we do resistance screening, but B, we then also want to go and test the host range, so to get information on how effective crop rotations are. So I have an MSc student, Ana Pontes de Acevedo, who has been looking at Fusarium solani, and we collaborated with Dr. Imami Larabra at Canada in Ottawa, who is a Fusarium taxonomist. And yes, lo and behold, when we looked at Fusarium, so-called Fusarium solani isolates from a wide range of pulse crop species and from across the province and from Alberta and Manitoba, we could identify or separate them into 4 separate species, one of which is the Fusarium solani in the strict sense, but then also 3 other Fusarium species. So Anna right now is in the process of testing isolates of these species on pea, lentil, chickpea, faba bean, blah, 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 and also on wheat, barley, and canola, because we want to know whether potential rotational crops are susceptible to them as well. This is really only preliminary information, but the good news is it seems that at least barley, wheat, and canola don't get heavily infected by these species. That is good news because it means when you then rotate pea and lentil or any of the pulse crops with barley, wheat, or canola, at least you're not increasing the inoculum of these species in the soil, and who knows, maybe it even goes a little bit down. Similarly, with Fusarium oxysporum, my research officer, Cheryl Armstrong-Shaw, has been working on this. We also could separate these isolates from across the Western Canada and from different pulse crop species into 6 separate species, including here, in fact, one group that appears to be a completely new Fusarium species. So this is really very, very fresh research. We haven't even initiated root rot screening with the different crop species. But what this means is we really have to pick apart now and look at which of these species all equally virulent on the different pulse crops, which ones are the most virulent ones, because that then means we have to pick very carefully which isolates we use for resistance breeding. And then also, I think in the long run, we really have to look, go back to the field and have a look at, okay, are all of these species equally common? Or is one or a few dominant and others are more rare? And is it the dominant species that are the most virulent ones? So the root rot complex has just become a little bit more complex, I would say. Tom already talked a little bit about Aphanomyces root rot in pea and indicated that the first generation of pea lines that we developed in a research project look quite promising in terms of root rot reduction. The graph he showed you was from controlled conditions. Last year they were tested in a field nursery for the first time. So these are the yellow bar lines here compared to checks in blue there, where you do see a little bit of reduction. Now you may say, well, that is not a huge, not as much as what Tom showed you, but the reason for that is, of course, in these field nurseries, it's not just Aphanomyces we have, but also different Fusarium species. And I have the table below with a species spectrum, and you probably noticed that at Saskatoon these lines performed a little bit better, and that is probably because we don't, or only at a very, very low level, have Fusarium avineum. Tom already indicated, unfortunately, these lines have lower yield potential and also a little bit more lodging. And I think part of the reason is the resistance is coming from Austrian winter peas, which are garden peas basically. And so there is probably some genetic that we crossed into these lines that influenced that, but also this was a research project that was very, very focused on Aphanomyces root rot resistance and not on yield or lodging, where you are very focused and also look at much smaller populations than you would do in a general breeding program, as Tom explained. But that is not a lost effort, as Tom indicated, because obviously that material has been used for crossing more with our elite varieties to bump up the yield, but also to start combining it with Fusarium avineum resistance where possible. So with the Fusarium avineum, Tom has been doing, in collaboration with us, has been doing a lot of screening for Fusarium avineum resistance. And unfortunately, with the Fusarium avineum resistance in pea, there's a very strong correlation with seed coat pigmentation. So this is a graph here that shows Fusarium avineum severity. And you can see that all the lines on the left with the lower levels of disease severity, which I painted in brown, are the pigmented varieties, whereas when you go to the yellow and green bars, which are the yellow and green peas, they are a bit more susceptibility. But you see that there is some variation as well, so there's certainly a little bit of room to accumulate resistant genes for those genotypes as well. Now, many, or some, at least some of you have probably heard about the strategic research initiative that was announced last January to accelerate discovery of root rot solutions for pea and lentil in Saskatchewan. And one of the objectives is to have a bit of a closer look at this association of secondary metabolites, and these seed pigments are part of these secondary metabolites in pea and lentil, and understand a little bit more what and which one of them are associated with Aphanomyces and Fusarium avineum resistance, because we believe that will help us maybe get a better handle on Fusarium root rot resistance and selection of good parents. Now, Fusarium avineum, as I indicated in my first slide, is also an important pathogen of chickpea, and we tested germplasm, chickpea germplasm as well to have a look at resistance. And similar to pea, there is a same story here, that the daisies, which have pigmentation in their seed coat, at least the majority of them, have fairly good partial resistance, but you do see there are the odd lines that also have high levels of disease. Similarly, in the Kabulis here in blue, there is quite a range, and that's what plant breeders like to see. If there is a range, they have material with which they can further breed resistance. So root rot resistance breeding has become part of the chickpea breeding program as well, because we do know that there is a little bit of root rot creeping into the chickpea too. Now, you've already met Dr. Anna Vargas, the new, I may still call her new lentil, CDC lentil breeder. So she started last January and has brought some fresh wind into the lentil breeding program. So it's really focused on yield, and in part looking as part of that on seed petitioning, biotic and abiotic stresses, and I will talk about the biotic stresses, obviously herbicide tolerance, and then also seed quality and other market requirements. So the root rot complex in lentil is an equally important topic as in pea, obviously. In lentil, the disadvantage we have is that unlike in pea, where colleagues in France and the US had already done all the groundwork and we could just jump on the bandwagon, with lentil, we really have to do the groundwork ourselves. And fortuitously, Anna, before she even became the lentil breeder, already started to do some screening here and identified a population in Lens culinaris where she could see some differentiation, and did a genetic study on that. Meanwhile, we in my group had done loads of screening in the past, and what we detected was that one of the close relatives of the cultivated species, Lens orientalis, has some really good resistance, not just to Aphanomyces, but also to Fusarium avineum. And I'm showing that here on the very right-hand side. You can CDC proclaim in orange the Aphanomyces, in blue the Fusarium, and you can see how well these Lens orientalis lines stand up in comparison. So the good news is it's a close relative of the cultivated species, and so we can easily cross and introgress that resistance into the cultivated species, and that's what we have been doing. Last year we received funding to cross these lines with elite lentil varieties, and that is underway now, and hopefully by this summer or early summer, we should be able to evaluate them in more detail and then start breed further with them. Tom already mentioned the root system. It's a little bit similar to what they say about people. You are what you eat, and with plants, I guess it's you are whatever your root system manages to provide for. And so the root system is really important and maybe has been neglected a little bit. Tom already mentioned that the root architecture is important for root rot resistance as well. Some of this may be escape mechanisms, but it may just be very specific root architectural traits that make it easier or more difficult for a pathogen to infect. But obviously the root has many other purposes as well, so nodulation, drought resistance, water uptake, and so looking a little bit more at the root system is going to be part of Anna's project, to look at it from really all angles. Now, again, the strategic research initiative has a substantial component here to evaluate root rot in elite lentil breeding lines, to really start breeding or continue to breed or enhance the breeding for root rot resistance across the whole breeding program, and also to implement the genomic selection for root rot resistance in lentil, which means we have to develop the molecular tools and the markers to do that. We haven't talked about foliar diseases in a long time, but it appears it's time to go back and remember those as well and talk about them as well. And I want to talk about anthracnose of lentil. today because this is our most important foliar disease in lentil and has been for probably 15 years. So just as a reminder, because we haven't talked about foliar diseases for a long time, there are two pathogenic races that were previously described in this pathogen population, Colletotricum lentis, that causes anthracnose. There is race 1 and there is race 0, and you can see here in this picture, which are plants of CDC robin, not grown anymore, but some of you may remember CDC robin, a small red lentil variety. And you notice that on the left-hand side, CDC robin, which has good partial resistance to race 1, has a little bit of disease there. The bottom part of the plant clearly has some lesions and also some leaves dropped. But on the right-hand side, when you inoculate CDC robin with a race 0 isolate, basically the plants die. So it's much more virulent. And unfortunately, that race has been dominating Saskatchewan probably for the last 10 years. If you go back 20 years, it was probably 50-50, but now we primarily have race 0 in our fields. Unfortunately, there are no high levels of resistance to race 0 in the cultivated species. So we have spent probably a decade trying to find something, but there is really nothing in the cultivated species. Now, if you look into the seed guide, and I have a copy here, you will notice, if you look at the column for resistance 2, that the varieties only have anthracnose race 1 resistance, and that at variable levels, mostly moderately resistant, some are intermediate. None of these varieties has race 0 resistance. So if you have a pathogen population out there that is race 0, predominantly race 0, and you only have varieties that have anthracnose race 1 resistance, basically all of the varieties out there right now are susceptible, have to be considered susceptible to the current pathogen population. Now, the reason why I want to talk about anthracnose again is because in the last 5-10 years, fungicide sensitivity has crept into this pathogen population. And what that means, if you spray a fungicide or certain groups of fungicides, they have lost their efficacy. And the resistance is to group 11 fungicides, so the strobilurins. I have a table here which is not exhausting, and it's probably not the most up-to-date table, where I have color-coded the different fungicide groups, and you can see that group 11 is the purple one. And you notice that a lot of our fungicides are either strobilurins on their own or mixes with strobilurins. So that is just sort of a be aware slide. If you notice increasingly more anthracnose in fields despite fungicide application, that may be the reason here that you have a resistant population in your field. Now, again, last year, we got some funding to have a look at this again. And previously, and this is probably 15 years ago, high levels of resistance to this pathogen was found in Varieties. And I have a picture here on the left-hand side. You can see these tiny seeds are from Varieties. Also, the leaves are much more filigrane, and on the right hand, the cultivated species. So this was identified over a decade ago, and crosses were made, and this is not an easy feat because it's a distant relative. So the procedure is much more complicated. This line then was used for breeding, but the resistance never made it into the elite varieties. And we suspect that the reason for that is that with a crossing, it's not as if you just manage to move the resistance gene over into your cultivated background. You also drag some other genes over, and there is probably a link with undesirable traits. And so during the breeding process, at some point, they are thrown out, those lines are thrown out because maybe the seeds are shattering, and of course you don't want a variety where the seed is shattering. So this new project wants to have another look at this and develop partial resistance to race 0. We are now in a much better position because thanks to Dr. Kirsten Bett, we have genomic information, we have a lot of markers, and so we believe with a very focused and highly molecular approach, we will be able to move only the resistance over and get rid of all the undesirable traits to come up with a variety that has race 0 resistance. And that's really all I have. I want to thank all of our funding agencies that have been funding my program and the people I collaborate with. We are also collaborating a lot with the National Research Council of Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And I specifically also want to acknowledge the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities and the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation, who together with the Ministry of Agriculture here in Saskatchewan really contributes to disease surveys. And these disease surveys are very, very important for us to get a good idea of what is happening in the fields, what pathogens are cropping up, and what the issues are. Without that, we would not have been able to do all the root rot research we have done. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Great to see the progress that's being made and also the tremendous effort that's being put towards disease resistance. We are now going to move into some live Q&A with our presenter panel. A reminder to our panelists, please turn on your cameras now. And for attendees, it isn't too late to submit your questions, so please enter them in Slido's Q&A tab using event code 3760904. So as we wait for questions, I would like to thank everyone once again for all the great talks on varieties of pulses. So I'm going to have a look here at the questions that we have. So we have one question here that says, which pea variety out of the Aphanomyces partial resistance breeding program was supported for registration in 2024? So Tom, I will direct that to you.
Actually, none. As I mentioned, and as Sabine also pointed out, at the research level, yes, we've developed some lines that have better disease resistance, but overall, their overall performance isn't at a level that we feel are ready to go out to growers. I don't think growers would want a variety that was 10 or 15% lower yielding than the Czechs, so stay tuned.
Thank you, Tom. There is a question again on peas. In maple peas, CDC Blazer is not preferred by buyers. Are new maple pea varieties on the horizon, and will they have better market acceptance?
The new one that we're mentioning that I showed on my second to last slide has slightly smaller seed size than Blazer. And I think generally in the maple pea market, small seed size is desirable. So that could be a possibility. But it's such a specialty world that I think buyers would have to have a look and get a feel for it also with their markets in Canada or overseas.
Thank you, Tom. There was a question on disease. Does a disease such as Aphanomyces specifically target nodulation, or does it target the roots overall? Our moderator has indicated that you can learn more about Aphanomyces and how it affects the plant on our website in our resources. I think that in a short answer, it does affect the roots overall as well as nodulation. And I don't know if anyone has anything they'd like to add to that, but I think that would be the quick answer.
I think that would be the quick answer. Maybe Sabina wants to comment more, but
Yes.
if the roots are unhealthy, then it's going to be hard to set up a good nodulation machinery.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, people are probably aware that if there is too much nitrogen in the soil, roots will not nodulate or allow the bacterium to invade and develop a nodule. So this interaction between the root and the bacterium is very susceptible to the local conditions. And if the roots are in poor health, again, the bacterium will not nodulate. Or will not, the plant and the root will not, the bacterium will not develop the nodules.
Yeah, that really makes sense. Another question, can you explain the lentil slide on biotic and abiotic stressors, root rot complex slide in more detail? And this is for Sabine. You're muted there, Sabine.
I have to share again if you want me to do that. So I assume you're talking about this slide. So this is just here a picture of infected root plants. And what Anna was looking at is this population.
Sorry, Sabina, we can't see your slide there. It
Oh.
says you're at the end of your slideshow. But we have time. If you want to set it up again there, just give it a shot.
Maybe. Can you see this slide now?
It says end of slideshow, click to
Okay.
exit.
I have to see. Okay.
Oh, there we are. Now I can see you're navigating back. Thank you so much.
Okay. I didn't realize I had to go into presentation mode. Okay, so here is just the slide with a root rot. This is the population Anna looked at. So it's a cross between CDC Redberry and Shasta. And this is the range of disease development you can see, she saw. So this is a plant population that is really coping very well. This obviously doesn't do so well, and that is here the range of disease responses that you could see. And then she did a molecular study to look whether she could identify genomic regions in these lines that were associated with root rot. So it's just I didn't want to go into too much detail. It's just an example of how we try to get a better understanding of the genes that are involved in root rot resistance, because it is a very complex trait where a lot of genes are involved, and that is part of one puzzle of how to do that.
Thank you, Sabine. Okay, let me see, where are we at here? So we have a question on CDC Limerick. It's the best green pea for bleaching, and we're CDC Husky and CDC Rider compared to CDC Limerick. I think that's partly a question for the work that we did in the Pulse Quality Program. In the years that we looked at bleaching, which was 2023 and now going into 2024, CDC Limerick was not included in the regional variety trial, so that's why it wasn't included in that particular comparison. You know, it would be nice to have it in there. There are so many pea varieties and only so much room in the regional variety trials that some of the older varieties are removed to make room for some of the newer varieties. However, Tom, if you would like to comment, because I'm sure you've seen some comparative either data or images.
Yeah, I would say that Limerick, Rider, Husky would be similar in bleaching resistance, so all would be considered quite good for bleaching resistance, with, of course, Husky certainly being higher yielding, and Rider maybe intermediate between Limerick and Husky on yield.
Oh, thank you, Tom. That's really good to hear. There's another question for you, Tom. Are you coming out with a smaller seeded maple pea to replace Acer? And I think you commented on that.
Yeah, basically the comment I just made earlier. I mean, Acer is quite an old variety now. It's not really officially on the list anymore. So the one that I put up on the screen might be an option. As I said, it's a bit smaller than the varieties that are on the market right now.
Thank you. Here's another question on peas. There is a niche market for snack green peas. This market requires taste and bigger seeds. What do you see that would fit this market?
Yeah, I think I think I couldn't mention one particular variety. I assume that something like forest could be reasonably good, but I don't quite know what the person asking the question is driving at in terms of snack. I mean, there is marrow fat, which is probably the best fit for snack peas, which are I didn't mention in my talk, but these are larger type that have a blocky shape, that have nice flavor and certainly go into snack food markets. So I think that's probably where you might want to go.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I think CDC Tetris was one that was also used in that type of niche market. Is that correct?
Yes, it was briefly, but it never really took off for various reasons. But that was the intention for that one.
Okay.
But the truly kind of snack types are the marrow fats.
Thank you, Tom. So question now on low Vicine, Convicine, asking how stable is the trait and is certified seed necessary to ensure the trait? This would be a question that we would direct to Anna. So if you want to send an email to her. However, I can also say that certified seed is very important to ensure this trait. There's always going to be a very small number of seeds that are high Vicine, and there's low levels of contamination. And that's why certified seed, you don't want to reproduce seed year after year after year of the same seed source and not have good testing, as any contaminated seed would be multiplied. Sabine, you have your hand up. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think without being a specialist, I think we can say the trait is stable. The main issue is the outcrossing, and Anna addressed that, right? You just have to make sure there are no varieties out there that have high Vicine, Convicine content, because you have a high level of outcrossing through bees in Faba bean. That is the biggest risk. But the trait as such is stable.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I think regardless of your seed source, testing that seed before planting is absolutely mandatory, so that you know what the quality is going in and what you can expect for quality coming out. So we have a question here for Tom again. Are you working on any new green pea varieties?
Oh, definitely. Maybe about a third of our program is dedicated to green peas. So, yep, we're working on those with all of the objectives that we have for yellow pea in terms of yield and lodging resistance and root rot resistance and so on. But of course, added onto that would be, the nice green color and bleaching resistance. So, yeah, again, those are coming.
Sounds great. I had a question for Benzon on the Vibe image analyzer for seeds. How effective is this for assessing bleaching in green peas and greenness in yellow peas?
It's quite effective, Laurie. We just had to set it up, but yeah, we're using it for bleaching measurements now. In fact, Janet was telling me you could actually extract the, say, RGB values of seeds measurements from that machine, and you could set it to measure other traits. So or other seed parameter, seed color. It's quite flexible equipment.
Well, that's awesome. And that's something I would like to see eventually added to the pulse quality program that we have at the food center. Right now, they have systems for testing color of flowers that are milled from pulse crops. But we'd like to have something that could accurately assess seed coat color, both in peas and lentils, and give a numerical rating. Here's a question. Are all seed growers aware of the need to test Faba for low Vicine and where to send? Again, probably a question for Anna, but if anyone wants to weigh in on this one, that would be great. I think this is part of our communication strategy, is trying to get that information out there. There is a seed lab that is capable of testing, and we need to get that information out to people. It's part of our ongoing strategy for communication. So yeah, if you just keep watching our SPG comms, I think you'll get that information. I had a question for Bunyamin. So protein was also in chickpeas was also tested in pulse quality program. Now we tend to focus on protein in peas for the most part, but can you comment on the importance and opportunities of protein in chickpea?
Yeah, thanks. So this is mostly, Laurie, is for in-house information, so that we know where we stand and we have the variability. So happen to be they're quite variable, ranging from 19 to 24% to what we have in chickpea. So it is important for all consumers basically looking for higher protein content, both in Kabuli and Desi. But the requirement for Desi, the processor really like to have less than 2% oil, which is really, I don't see that at the moment in our germplasm. We screen a bunch of collection of Desi, none of them below 2%. But in Kabuli, they like to have higher oil. So high oil, high protein, that's kind of make the hummus creamy and tasty. That's what they like to have. So 24% probably at the moment, the kind of optimum that we can get, maximum we can get. So it's range from 20 to 24%. So that's probably the one that we will see. In other case, germplasm, I saw lines with higher oil, higher protein, but lower yield. So it's kind of a negative correlation between protein and yield. You get up to like 27, 28% even, but the yield kind of drop when you get into that high protein content. I think similar in peas, right, Tom? That's probably what I can share.
All right, thank you so much. There was a question here, Sabine, do you think resistance will need to be developed for each of these Fusarium species independently, or is there overlap?
As far as we know, there is no overlap as such. So when we identify sources of resistance, we have to do it pathogen by pathogen. And then you try to combine the resistance. That's the simple answer. I mean, obviously, if you do some of that screening in a field nursery where you are have a hodgepodge of different pathogens that may tell you sooner whether you happen to have one line or one genotype that has multiple resistance to multiple pathogens, but the probably more productive way is to do this under controlled conditions, pathogen by pathogen. And that's what we tend to do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Also, can you explain how the Fusarium root rot ratings for pea varieties are determined?
The rating scales tend to be developed by basically the plant pathologists who starts working on a particular plant species, eventually, I mean, if it is an important root rot pathogen, usually eventually then the people who work on it come together and coordinate so that everybody is using the same scale. But at least in the early days, it's often a range of different rating scales. But we scientists obviously are very interested in comparing our results with those of others, and that's when rating scales are very important. Now, if you think about, and maybe that was more the target of the question, the rating scale for Fusarium arenacea versus the rating scale for Aphanomyces, you obviously also have to keep in mind how the symptoms express, and so the symptom expression upon a Fusarium arenacea inoculation may be quite different to that of a Fusarium arenacea infection, and so you often cannot use the same scale for different pathogens.
Okay, thank you so much. With such complex species composition in Fusarium, how would this impact breakdown of genetic resistance in pulses?
Well, as I just said, it makes it more complicated, right? Because you have to find resistance to each of these pathogens. There is just not one gene or a set of genes that will be effective against all the Fusarium species. They do differ. In most likely, they will differ, and so you have to just put them all together. So it's much more work than if you have to deal with more pathogens.
Oh, for sure. Question here, if a grower is already getting wiped out by nearly 100% by Aphanomyces, would it not make sense to release a variety even yielding 75 to 80% of commercial varieties? That's probably directed to you, Tom.
Yeah, that's an interesting hypothetical question, but I think in that situation, maybe the grower picks another species or another crop to grow, maybe chickpea or faba or soy on that land instead of exposing a variety with only moderate resistance to a very heavy infection level. But it's a good question and something we have to ponder as a group, along with all the crop rotation implications and so on.
Maybe I can chime in here as well, because that is exactly not what we would like to see, because the danger of resistance breakdown is real. And so if you take varieties that have partial resistance and put them into a highly infested field, you are significantly increasing the risk that the resistance breaks down, and we do not have any other resistance to Aphanomyces at the moment, right? It's a very limited pool of resistance we have, and so we have to manage it very, very carefully.
Thank you. That's really important to know that information. Our moderator just wanted to comment that we're getting some questions that are more related to agronomy and crop protection. Those are questions that we haven't asked yet or passed on. So in this webinar, we're sticking to breeding and variety development. But please feel free to contact one of our agronomy managers with your questions. Their contact information is available on our website. Plus, we also have a very robust resource library with more information on growing pulses. So just a comment to those that are listening and why maybe we're not addressing those questions. Question here. What do the colors mean in the lentil slide on breeding root rot resistant lentil varieties?
Is this my slide again, I assume? Must be, yeah, lentil, I guess.
It must be, yes.
Okay. I'm a lentil person here. Okay, let me just read. I think that is what they are referring to. And so the orange bars here are related to Aphanomyces root rot, and the blue bars are to Fusarium solani. And I think this also relates to the rating scales, because we have two rating scales here. And as I explained earlier, for the Fusarium, we rate the disease differently compared to the Aphanomyces. So if you look at the orange bars, this is the rating scale for the orange bars, and this is the rating scales for the Fusarium. But it doesn't really matter to understand the graph. It's clear CDC Proclaim has high Aphanomyces and high Fusarium, whereas these lines have low Aphanomyces and low Fusarium, Avanesium resistance.
Thank you. Here's a question. Is there any research work anywhere on the planet on making pulses immune to all root rots via gene editing or some other transgenic approach?
Well, I mean, there are obviously efforts in developing gene editing technology for pea and lentil in general, regardless of what trait you look at. Now, making peas and lentil immune to all root rot pathogens. I mean, when you do gene editing, what you basically do, you switch on or switch off certain genes, right? We know that the root rot resistance is very complex, and there are a lot of genes involved. We, at this point, do not know which all of these genes are. We mostly don't know any of the genes that are involved. And then only once we know them, then someone could start switching them on and off depending on what is positive for root rot resistance. Now, whether we ever get to the point where we then have totally immune plants, I don't know, because it's not as if resistance, the resistance mechanisms in a plant are completely separate from all other physiological processes in the plant. So it may very well be that some of the genes that are involved are also important for root growth or green chlorophyll in leaves or whatever, right? And so you have to be very careful what you switch on and off, because yeah, maybe your plant is resistant, but maybe then all of a sudden you have a gigantic root system and there is no energy left for any shoot growth, right? So you have to be, it's a very complicated process. It's not just like a light switch, you switch it on and off.
That's a very good answer. Thank you. Here's a question on research plot trials. Do they account for previous crop rotation? For example, do you follow the previous crop rotation within the trials? As SPG manages the regional variety trials, certainly that is in our protocols to have that type of rotation. And Tom, if you wanted to comment a little bit as well, because CDC has managed many field trials.
Right. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I can speak for the other CDC breeders that typically we're using a 4-year rotation, at least at our local trials. So we only have pulse plots 1 year and 4. We also grow trials off station, and those are typically on farmers' land. So we don't have as much authority over the rotation, but we generally plant our plots on cereal stubble. So there is at least that amount of rotation. Maybe Bunyamin wants to make some more comments about that, or Benzon.
Yeah, basically it's clearly Tom. So we like to have mostly on the stubble and 3-4 year rotation. I think mostly a 3 to 4 year rotation as well on the farm field. So cooperators, long-term cooperators are well aware about that, and we'll try to fit in with their rotation as well.
Yeah, same with us, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know that where we've had some really heavy moisture this year, we did lose some trials to Aphanomyces, but you know, we do what we can to make sure that we try to have clean land. That's hard to find right now. So one last question. With regards to disease resistance in varieties, is there a public graph we can access to compare varieties? I think I could just chime in here that in some of our resources, there has been some publications of graphs that have come out of, I think, out of your program, Sabine. And I don't know if you have any more information to add for that.
No, I think I have been asked several times by SPG to provide graphs, and I think they have been published somewhere. So maybe it's just a question to locate them again and maybe make them more prominently
I think
available.
So. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to, whoever asked the question there, if you want to go to our resource library on our website, you will find them. And Tom, you had your hand up.
Just to say that, I mean, in the varieties of grain crops that gets updated each year, we update for lentil and pea and all the crops, you know, the ratings the best ratings that we have available at the time for each variety. So that is a resource. In some cases, generally we go to like intermediate or moderately susceptible, those kind of verbal type ratings, but in some cases we're also using numeric ratings. For example, for Mycosphaerella and pea, we've gone to a numeric scale to try to increase the level of detail that we can provide to growers. And it's part of the reason that we're in the root rot work on pea, that we're screening all the commercial varieties to see if we can a little bit better differentiate them with respect to field-based root rot.
I think root rot is not in the seed guide though yet, right?
Well, in pea we have a column called Fusarium root rot. That's what it's called at this moment. So we may have to adjust what we call it, because we may just want to call it at this moment, we may just want to call it root rot, because in the nurseries that we're using, we know that we have Aphanomyces and various Fusariums. So the best we can say probably is general root rot.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up our Q&A session there. Thanks for all the great questions from our listeners. And another thank you to all our presenters and attendees. So that is a wrap on this year's Pulse Variety Seminar. Be sure to watch for an email from us following this event, as it will include a link to watch the recording. It will also have a link to a survey for you to share your feedback on this event. Please do so, as your opinion helps SPG deliver valuable extension opportunities. Finally, just a reminder that registration is now open for SPG's Winter Pulse meetings. We will be making stops in Saskatoon, Regina, and Swift Current in early February. So please check our website at saspulse.com for more information. So again, thank you everyone, and have a great day.